Hey everybody, we're back again, and it's Petey, and we also have
Alvin ready to rock.
today, since we did some New Mutant stuff the other day, and there's going to be a Wolverine and Deadpool movie coming out soon. I thought it'd be fun to do a comparison video. We'll compare the two most important comics in collecting, or at least on Marvel side, collecting history for other things. For DC, there's obviously the classic stuff like obviously Superman Action Comics #1 or Detective. Those ones are the
Real stuff.
yeah. But these ones are your well, no, New Mutants #1. Even though the print run is crazy, the Hulk's print run was decent because it was selling well. So it's like there were millions of these books, but they became the hot book. Oh no, actually, there's more hundreds of thousands of the Hulk, and then with the New Mutants at this point, it's probably, I don't know, maybe like a 450,000 copies of this book, but nonetheless, they're both the big kahunas for Marvel, outside of obviously the classic books, which of course possibly sell as much or more. But these books are very important to collectors. Hulk 181 and New Mutants 98, where they introduce the Hulk, Wolverine, and then New Mutants 98. Now these books are kind of similar. Can you tell me your thoughts on either of these books before we go into and look through them?
In terms of collectability, or
Or just your thoughts on them, your thoughts as comic books.
well, Hulk 181 is tough because that kind of goes without saying. I enjoyed it for the story long before it became the cash cow. First appearance of Wolverine, which I always believed was Incredible Hulk 180, since I read that in real time, and I was like, oh, okay, great. I'll get to the next issue and see what this guy is all about. Only for years later to learn that, hey, my young and ignorant self couldn't tell a cameo from a first appearance, and
Mm-hmm.
still can't. But uh, I mean, that cover says it all. That's probably the biggest draw. That's a really, really great cover.
Yes.
And they did some in-house ads for the issue as well, as they were trying to make, a big, well, they were trying to push Wolverine as a Canadian character. That's the foundation of his origin, that they had a lot of Canadian readers, and they're like, we don't really have a stable of Canadian characters, so we can introduce some stuff like that, you know give something back to the readership, since we have primarily, American characters. And then you go in and you just have you have a nice classic dust up of, the Hulk, the Wendigo, Wolverine, and, nobody's on anybody's side but their own at the end of the day. And then it becomes the friend of, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. We get that type of stuff playing out. It's I don't know, it's a little challenging to be critical since it's such an entertaining story, always has been, and you've got that great cover. And then of course it's considered Wolverine's first appearance, so you have all those things rolling in. Now, New Mutants 98, that's a lot easier because that was just, hey, there's a whole bunch of characters that just get introduced here. And for the most part, none of them are where they are today. None of them, are what they were when they were introduced. As Deadpool is pretty much introduced as the, uh, let me not say man of mystery, but he's the anti-hero mercenary. And then he goes off to become this fourth wall breaking character, and that's not where he was here. And then we don't really get a lot of him here because he's introduced with Domino Gideon, and then we only find out later, oh, that's not Domino. This is, this is
Yeah.
actual Domino. So I'm not even sure if this counts as a cover appearance, since people say, oh, well, that's not really her. That was somebody in disguise. Even on the cover, she looks exactly like her, though, right? And you can Gideon, I don't believe ever became much more than you know than what his appearance was right here. But this is another one. Well, hey, everybody's drives after it because of the first appearance, or the first appearances, and the value of the book at this point. Story wise, your mileage may vary. I didn't really get a lot out of it story wise, but history is of course going to look on it as this great issue because of the first appearances and the monetary value they're set with it.
All right, thanks. Yeah, because I think I did a video on these, so it's good to hear your side of it. And one of the things that one thing is for as kids, this was just a you could see it in the price guides of a book that was probably 50 to 75 as in the 80s, and so I'm always thinking should I get it, should I not get it, and then the reprints come out, so it's like, okay, I can read this, and my brother getting the issue before this and after this, so trying to get back in the days you had to piecemeal the story if you didn't read it off the stands. So it was just always a book that people kind of look outside of obviously the price, propping it up. Then you get it, and it's just such a fun issue. But then the New Mutants, I was buying the New Mutants in real time when it was coming out. So at the Hulk, I think what did we have? Do we have much? If we probably had more. If we had one, it was probably the last Herb Trimpe fight with Hulk and Doc Samson. I think my brother might have had that, where I first found out that Hulk was Bruce Banner was Robert Bruce Banner, and that was like, oh, the Bruce is his middle name, which is only because Stan called him Bob Banner at some point. But reading that book, which is like Hulk 192 or something like that, and then
did they ever work David Banner into the whole equation, or that was strictly the
oh, no. Did they do that with his father? I'm not sure if his father in that Crossroads issue they introduced his name. I know the movie did that, but no, I don't think they did. With New Mutants, I was buying at the time. I think I said it a number of times that I had hope that as many of his peers had learned on the job, that he was going to go and try, build up the anatomy, that sort of thing, backgrounds. And this is the point where I didn't even understand why Louise was gone, but she was sorely missed, because this was kind of it was very much, it works in the way comic books work, like the way some Image or Savage Dragon would work, where you don't really need that much setup for this stuff, where you see in the Hulk 181 there's a lot of setup. Even though Wolverine's a man of mystery, they don't reveal who he is, they give you enough background to understand why he showed up. Whereas in the New Mutants issue, he kind of just shows up as a cool character, and it shows you at the time this was a pretty hot book when it came out. Like this, the people could sell this issue for like $10 or more after it came out, so it was pretty hot. So like for the readers, or maybe the younger readers, and some of the people that were my age, were still like, this is just the pinnacle. The art guys or friends of mine, that sort of thing, we were kind of if the art snobs were kind of like, this guy needs do a little more. But at the same time, there was promise that was kind of unrevealed. And the other thing is with this, the difference, whereas I'm not sure the Hulk 181 cover was, obviously it might have been a John Romita sketch, what is actually done by Herb Trimpe, but this is kind of based on this cover is New Mutants based off of what's that thing, Man of Steel, where DC hadn't used the Man of Steel setup with the characters standing on one side and having some sort of thing going on the other side of the comic book. And DC never used it, but Rob did. But yeah, there's so many characters. I was kind of like, do we need 3 more characters? Because I want some of the New Mutants to come back, but I didn't really understand that the New Mutants was dying out for the X-Force thing. It was kind of a surprise to me. So it was like, I don't know. I was hoping all of the regular New Mutants would come back, but I think I guess Rob and Bob Harris, they deemed them kind of, out of whack with what was going on with the X-Men. And you kind of see some of that in Hulk 181 once we go through it. But let me just...
Did we need 3 new characters? No. Did Rob Liefeld need 3 new characters? Yes.
Yeah.
And again, I've always credited him. He was smart. He said, he played the numbers game. He says, hey, if I throw in these new characters and somebody takes off, I got a percentage coming to me. Where a lot of the guys weren't savvy as to that. And, he's definitely reaping the benefits of it now. Even when you see him in person, he's signing New Mutants 98. This guy can charge a premium for the book, and he does. So,
and he won't sign, what was it? He won't sign the facsimile one for some reason. Like, he's not going to allow another book to blow up in price for next to
Why
no
should he?
money.
This is, I mean, you can, however you may feel about it, that's just a good business decision. Why
Hmm.
should I come over here and allow my signature make this book, which is much more easy to get, much more readily available than this one over here? And I'm going to come over here and just like, no, not doing it. It's just going to be these books over here, okay, that are going to appreciate in value. And I'm pretty certain anytime he gets a hand on one of them himself, he can sign it, appreciate the value in the other ones. No, they'll totally be unsigned and they'll always be second rate in comparison to it. So why is he going to help them out?
Well, to be that, and I'm not faulting him for it, but to be that savvy as far as your business and being like, hey, if you pull out your original ones, it probably costs you something to get it. So I'll sign it. I don't know what is he. I haven't looked at his table because his table is always packed. But I don't know what his table is like. But at the same time, it's a pretty savvy move because you can hear some of the things when he talks about it, like not wanting the, what's that book, Avengers versus JLA to come out because he said that would lessen the price or lessen the special, how special those original pages that Perez did. It would lessen how special they was if you have a whole thing. And I was just like, just kind of thinking in that way is kind of just odd to me. It seemed like it would still work, which is, I mean, those pages still sell, but I guess as a collector, he's kind of savvy in that way to be like, no, this is this is gonna ruin my copies. My copies are gonna be null and void. Oh man.
Smart money.
Yeah, yeah.
I can't fault the business decision. Collectors may fume at the whole thing, but uh, sorry, lads, it's not about you. It just isn't.
So hold on for a second. Let me do something. The computer is acting up. So let's get into it. All right. So we'll do the Hulk first, since it came first. And here we go. The classic. Oh, hold on. Let me fix this. Hulk 181. We got Wolverine, the Lofty, saying he's the first and greatest Canadian superhero. And whoever survives that has to deal with the Wendigo, right? So it's pretty action packed. No battle's gonna go on here, and we already know the Hulk has fought the Wendigo around, I think, 160 or something like that, maybe a year or two before. So it's like the issue before this was just a knockdown, drag out fight with no winners, and then Wolverine pops up. So it's just like if you were reading it at the time, you're just like, whoa, who's all this stuff going on here? So you kind of get him leaping to camera. So it's like the classic comic book intro by having him come to camera. And the Hulk and the Wendigo are surprised. And a lot of
For those of us in the know, we remember that most comic books, these are like up through the Bronze Age. A comic book would start with a splash page, and that was supposed to give you that big burst of action, and then you got into the rest, of the story. On average, up until I think modern age, like a comic book could have up to say 12 panels on a page, as they were doing some serious well, compression as opposed to the decompression that would happen later. So
Mm-hmm.
right there, we've got a nice classic splash page to start off with.
All right, so they have a little bit of a recap in the captions, giving you a little bit of stuff just so you're not totally blind, which I'm all fine for, and fine to happen. And this Wolverine is pretty cocky. He's smaller than both of them, but he comes in cocky. And the other thing is that there's some bits in here that play out in Marvel that I guess what they call insiders call Marvel serendipity, where it's like it fits in with what came later, like him being cocky, him, like being very aggressive at the same time. And that would go into his SOB sort of personality. And this was obviously, it was because obviously, who was it? Roy Thomas wanted a Canadian hero. And wanted Lean Wen because he's good with voices and dialects to write it, and then they had obviously John Romita design the character, and Herb Trimpe drew the issue. Right, so there we go. That's enough precursors for that. Come in there, Wolverine smashes through the both of them. he's after. He doesn't care. He's been sent in to handle business, and he's hopping around, and he's he said like a big rabbit, and he said I'm like a Wolverine, if you don't mind, Hulk. And then when he cuts into the Wendigo, he's like, that's much better. And he's really like, well, we've seen some wear and tear on the Wendigo, so let's work on him first. And he sees the Wendigo weakening, and the Hulk, of course, says, hey, wait a second, this little guy must be my friend. And he leaps into the battle against the Wendigo. And this shows that that Wendigo's no slouch, right? And Wolverine picks up on it, and he's like, hey, I'm gonna play to that. And the Hulk comes in and finishes it. Well, not that he sets him up for Wolverine to do the finish. And I think Byrne would take these angles when they fought again the second time in the X-Men, and he would obviously spin the camera around, but he would give you that same effect, but closer and showing you Wolverine face the camera. But this is like a real fun sort of thing. It's real action packed, and they're taking him out, and there's a moment of silence between friends. But Wolverine's not his friend. He's just going back to action. Now, this is a big part of the story. We introduced these characters right here that show up: Marie Cartier and Jorge Baptiste, and the two of these guys are going to be like they're going to be an important part of the plot. And this is the thing where you see a difference where everyone in the 90s had a costume and cool and had guns. Here we got a regular guy, and we have this mystic girl who will play an important part of the plot, which is this girl is the Wendigo's brother, and she wants to heal him, but she has a plot that she's going to turn. This was the whole plan in the initial thing, was to turn the Hulk into the Wendigo. That's what the plan, and free her brother. So there's a lot of story here going on here in this two-parter. But Wolverine and Hulk are going at it. But then we get to, if you hadn't understood how he is here, we get to this Canadian military, and they're talking about Wolverine being there. And what I talked about, was talking about the serendipity, is that they say sending in Wolverine alone, which would work even though there was no thought of the Alpha Flight, no thought of any of those characters. But the idea that, hey, why would we send him in there alone? Who could they have sent him in there with? But it sets up another plot that the Hulk is still finished if Wolverine doesn't finish the job. But they only gave him 6 hours to do. So I think we're halfway in. No, we still got a ways to go. What are your thoughts on this plot so far?
It works for the age group that they were looking to entertain at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Again, the major thing is the action. Okay, a lot of the other stuff, Alpha Flight, because Alpha Flight, of course, that's going to be retroactive at the end of the day. So the whole idea of this, and Wolverine appears in 3 issues. He appears 180, 181, and then again in 182. So again, that's a testament to the strength that they were trying to do with this character and get him established as a Canadian hero in the Marvel Universe. But I just think this is a really good action-packed issue. Introduces a new cool character for kids.
Yeah. So, and so we get back to this subplot, and this mystic girl, Marie, she stops Wolverine and the Hulk. And when they're about to take the Hulk away, he turns back into a man. And what's his name? Bruce Banner in this arc, this is the closest that he gets to be in this story. And this caused Jorge to be like, no, I'm not going to do this. He's totally against it, and he walks off, right? And of course, we're worried about Bruce Banner because now it seems more than likely that he's going to change him into it. And he goes into but what is Jorge? What is he doing? He walks off. She's trying to drag Bruce Banner over, but then changes to the Hulk and he realizes that, you know, that she wasn't his friend. And she's like, I am. And then Hulk is like, forget it. I'm going back to Wolverine, and they go back to battling.
One
But
thing I want to point out before it gets too gone. If you actually no, I thought we missed. No, I thought we had passed it. We didn't.
okay.
Okay.
So then we see the Wendigo's awake again, and we're worried for her now. While what's the name? They're both startled. The Hulk is like, I'm finishing this guy off. I've had it. And this bit right here, when he punches him in the head, and it was only a glancing blow, but it drops him. This led to obviously some point later they realizing maybe there's something a little more to Wolverine because I think when he first fights on the what's that thing in X-Men, he gets beat up by Catman, one of the Animen, which I think a lot of fans today would call BS on. But this would hint where they saying, well, how did he survive this, fight with the Hulk, which would lead them to kind of give him the adamantium thing. So it's kind of some of the things that wasn't answered, but a lot of things didn't have to be answered. We just had a lot of fun here, but there's a lot of story here. And then we see the Wendigo can't talk. It's the only thing he can say is the Wendigo most of the time. So he kind of shows her, and her brother Paul is back. And we find Jorge has sacrificed himself because he loved her, and she was so solely focused on her brother. She didn't see why this guy was hanging around her all this time. And he goes off in a rage, and the Hulk,
because she's selfish.
Wolverine is out cold. Look at him. He just have his feet, and Hulk sees her crying, and Hulk, of course, at this point is in his goofy mode. So even though he was upset with her, he's there to comfort her. And a lot of Hulk issues with Win was doing would end with a sad, sort of poignant sort of moment, which was always a great part of it, why he was such a great writer on this title. So it was, what was the part that you wanted to throw in there?
Wolverine lost the fight. And this is something that, unfortunately, today in 2023, most fans would never be able to accept. They would always, oh no, he's going to keep regenerating or some nonsense like that. And I mean, I've already been on record that the fight between Wolverine and the Hulk under Peter David, I enjoyed that fight, without any problem. But even in that one, it was still established that Wolverine could hang around, but the Hulk was eventually going to kill this dude if it came down to it. Mm-hmm. And then it just became that, Wolverine's regenerative powers, his ability to regenerate was always going to somehow, surmount anything else that was thrown at him, to the point that this guy's surviving nuclear explosions. But initially, the whole fight was like, hey, look, the only reason why this guy is alive is because the Hulk hit him with a glancing blow. If not, his brain would have been jelly, and that would have been the end of it. But that was, enough for us to be entertained as kids. And again, he wasn't established as a mutant in that first appearance. So this was just a guy with, the adamantium skeleton claws. There was no, I don't think there was any, there was no healing factor or anything of that nature that was shown initially. But okay, you could come in and you could have these two, and he could be a really tough dude, really scrap, and lose, and everybody still thought it was cool, as opposed to today, where nobody wants to accept their favorite character losing under any circumstances. And we'll get a Wolverine here that is totally acceptable, and in 2023 we'll get something like Cosmic Wolverine, which makes no damn sense whatsoever.
Mm-hmm. All right, so hold. All right, so we thoroughly enjoyed one. So we have to go to the next issue.
Really? Do we really have
to? Oh gosh, you are so wrong. I didn't say that, Rob. I did not say that. So here we go. We're in this issue, and sorry, let's get here. and we're introduced to Gideon. That's similar to how we got introduced to Wolverine. Gideon is talking to camera, right? He seems pretty confident, and he's talking about some sort of attack sequence. So we find out this is a training thing, right? And he kind of using the what was in, I think, was it Fantastic Four 252, where they kind of with Byrne flipped it over. Comics at this stage would kind of use this flip over panel that didn't always work as far as your reading, but it was big. It's funny, you know what? Side note, when I think was it Punisher Warzone was out, and John Romita Senior and Junior were on stands, like the show where they did those videos about comic greats, and he put a Punisher Warzone, and he sent it to Stan, and you could tell when Stan saw the first page was a splash page and the second page was double splash, which you turn over. Stan was kind of like, he was staying positive, but he was like, he would have never approved that sort of flip. Like, obviously the Fantastic Four one, it was consistent in the entire issue. Stan might not have wanted to do that either, but it was at least consistent the way where Stan was looking at it and saying, I got to take the comic book and now turn it over to read. It's like, but this type of panel was working at the time. And this was what you would call, what I think Rob would call the anchor pages, where you have the cool shot and you have the setup on the side. Now, storytelling isn't that strong, but you kind of get it. You understand that there's some robots on the side. He's punching something, even though he's that high in the air, and they're in a scuffle. So there's a lot of a cluttered panel on the bottom to say, oh, look, he's breaking these things. It's small setup. Now, it's kind of hard to imagine that he had an art assistant on these pages, but he did. That would help him out. Fill blacks in, blow up the pages for him to do finishes on, that sort of stuff. But at this point, I think he was inking it, but he also had his assistant. So, I think you can see there's a page that was done by, I think, Joseph Rubinstein. I can point it out, but I just know from his style of inking. But right, so we see Gideon, and he's shown to be like this tough guy, right? And we're not going to get too much on Gideon, but no, actually, we're going to get a little more on Gideon. But as he goes along in the New Mutants history with Rob going, this plot line was kind of let go. Outside of I think the whole thing was kind of let go. But right, so we see him, he's tough and he can handle this in this training sequence, and he comes down and he's connected to obviously Robert DaCosta, right? Which is Sunspot, right? And we hear him talking about Sunspot's father, right? And he set up so right here, the scripter is really setting up all this plot, where we, instead of showing it in having the thing, we just have a couple of dialogue lines of characters that we don't know yet, that we haven't met, like Eve. We know Emmanuel DaCosta from the previous thing, but this setup, he's going to have a connection to some plan that he's going to do, right? So there's a lot of dialogue. And then we go to the New Mutants that are in the Westchester, in the X-Men's facility in their danger room. And they're having a training sequence, and they have their new instructor, Cable. He's official now. They survived Extinction Agenda, and he's working with Sunspot, right? Now, to me, it was kind of bare bones, right? So the thing, this kind of setup, but see how little stuff you had to do to set up the danger room, and because we already know this stuff. So it's kind of working on, which is what didn't work for Image Comics. You didn't have this history of the X-Men to fall back on. So he's utilizing the history of the X-Men. So, hey, I've seen that sort of window thing where Professor X is in the danger room. I can figure this is danger room, and the scripter helps it out, saying it's a danger room, but there's a little visual cues where it's very slight where you can figure it out, right? And we've seen like the Angel have to deal with these metal poles kind of being shot at him, and we get to see something we didn't really know about Cable. He puts his arm out and he shoots a blast. Now this page I think was inked by Joseph Rubinstein. Doesn't look like the other pages, but it keeps Rob's faces on there. But he's inking it so it looks like everyone has an eye problem, where you kind of used to Rob's thinking of it. His handling of it is just everyone is look like they got pepper sprayed. But here we go, and we get to Manuel DaCosta. We meet Eve. Everything is set up with dialogue, right? So we don't get a big introduction to Eve, but we see she gave him a drink, right? And of course, dies. So we set up that whatever Gideon was doing was not that great, right? So this is basically the setup for Richter to get out. Where Rob, I think Rob didn't really like this character. He had his plans for this stuff. So he's like, you got to save Rain from the New Mutants because she's in Genosha. So it's a little bit of subplot, kind of ending this character that he's going to go try to save. What's the name? We have Boom Boom, who's a mainstay. She was one of the late add-ons to the New Mutants. She was more of a X Factor character, but she became a mainstay of the X Factor and the New Mutants, right? So when they go in there, here we go to set. Now we're halfway through. I asked you before what you were thinking. What do you think about this issue so far?
Okay. I think the way that you described it was much better than the issue ever was in terms of the overall read. And it's a showcase for the new characters created by Rob Liefeld. That was the big takeaway that, and again, this is not a book I read in real time because I wasn't a current New Mutants reader. I would read this sometime later. But I was looking at it, I was like, okay, this is pretty much a showcase for these new characters, which just happened to be created by Rob Liefeld. Now, of course, he's working, with an overall story. He's still working with an overall story, but there's a lot of light being given to these guys who are Liefeld characters. Some people will disagree, like, no, we're only getting a touch of Gideon, a touch of Domino, but Cable is his big creation at this point. And we see the seed of X-Force, which would have been laid a while ago, but we can definitely see it germinating here. So that's one of the things that always percolate in my mind when I'm reading through this. There's a lot of action. I mean, it still starts off, with the classic splash page, and then it gets into the action. There's not a lot else going on. There's a whole bunch of action here, and not a lot of else going on. And I only make that as a criticism because this is issue 98. And traditionally, when you're at issue 98, usually you're building towards something. Mm-hmm. Like there's a plot line that's usually has been established some issues before, which is probably going to conclude in about issue 100. And here, we're getting these new characters introduced, and it doesn't really seem to connect to anything going forward, and it won't, or anything that had come previously. So, and again, I don't know when the idea was solidified that the New Mutants was going to be canceled in favor of X Factor, but you get the feeling that what's going on here, in spite of the fact that it's a valuable book now, what's going on here doesn't really matter in terms of what you've been reading before. It may matter in the new series, which you don't necessarily know is coming down the pike, but this doesn't really matter overall.
And we'll go into, that's the thing. When we had, I think Rob did the annual where they said they had a pinup. I think I did an episode on it which was like a what if, where they showed like Ileana, Amara, like those characters seem like come back, and those are two of my favorites. I think even Mark Silvestri was talking, but Mark Silvestri, his complaint about the New Mutants was that they got rid of Ileana, but if he was on it, she would have been showcased right in front of it. But I think when he said his comments, she was I think a baby at that point. But Louise recently said, because her body, she'd gone from being young to old. You could easily have brought her back as soon. She was really surprised that she wasn't brought back sooner, but because she was the one that was kind of showcased. But going back to this issue, when I was reading this, I was like, okay, we have this tension between Richter and Cable in this panel here, right? He's never going to let Richter go. He's not going to ask permission. We have him in the library, and we see him get hit. It's like, dang, Richter's really upset. It's like, I have no idea that Deadpool is going to be introduced at this point. I'm like, Richter has a thing in comic book sense. I'm going with the shorthand that they got into a fight immediately, type of thing. But I was totally wrong in reading it when I was a kid. And I guess I was what, like 18, 19, something like that. We get introduced to Deadpool here, right? So he pops up, obviously done the right way, splash to camera, not really splash, but a close up to camera. He's similar to a character. He's similar to a bunch of characters. There's a lot of snake eyes. The actual design is similar to a Nemesis character who was in Alpha Flight, but who's the name
Snake
had?
Eyes,
Hmm?
Snake Eyes,
Snake
Deathstroke,
Eyes, yep.
Venom,
Yeah,
Bane.
it's got all your Deathstroke. There's so many bits, but this is the important thing. I don't. At some point, like a lot of, especially artist writers, they would try to stay away from because they would get so much criticism for doing something that was similar to something someone else did. Oh, that's just this. Oh, you're just trying to do this. And like Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld and all these guys, they went to it. They're like, people want these G.I. Joe type of ex-villains in here. And this is what they kind of gave us. Like, I think even Cable is similar to it could be, is similar to a characters in Star Wars or Metello that was in the Burn Run, because he comes in with gray hair and that sort of thing. It has a flashing green, but he has a green flashing eye. So it's like there's similarities to a lot of stuff with these characters, but the kids loved it. You can see why this book is so important, why Deadpool became such a big character. It's like they don't care that it's that. It's just give us another character that cool. So he comes in, he's got weapons, he got the G.I. Joe sort of pouches and such. So it kind of plays to it. And I think he said that Terry Stewart, or I think it was either Terry Stewart or the other guy who ran Marvel, one of those guys said he could be made into action figures. They kind of work well for action figures. And of course, because he got Snake Eyes right next to his artboard. It should be, posable and have all these things and detachable. But we have this thing. He comes in and he's talking about.
Keep going with the Snake Eyes. I mean, look at everything there that he's borrowing from that character. The full face mask. So and that ties into what? That's the whole man of mystery thing. We don't know who he is. He could be anyone. Mm-hmm. You got the big eyes, for Spider-Man or Venom or even Bane at the end of the day. Okay, and then you've got all the with the band of literally you got the utility belt around the waist, around the thighs, around the arm, the extra guns and everything of that nature. So this guy is mercenary, commando, Spider-Man, literally, let's just and then he doesn't even have the personality yet. He's just a merc as of this point.
Yes,
all of those things. It's like, look, let's just jam pack all that stuff together, and there at least we got. That's the initial character that we got. That's the creation of it. That's pretty much what you're looking at. Like, let me jam all of these things that have worked, put them all together, at least visually, and serve that up. And who's going to say no to it?
That's the thing. And we get some bits because I think, I don't know. I think it was Jim Lee that kind of tied in that, started the setup that Cable. Well, I think they might have talked with each other, but the Cable was actually Cyclops' son type of deal. Because I think who's that guy? I think Eric Larson said originally Cable was kind of going to be like, in his mind, was going to be Cannonball from the future type of deal. And I think Chris Claremont was trying to make Cable Ahab, and then Jim Lee had made the connection between Nathan and Cable, and that made X-Men 201 become a really expensive issue for a while in the 90s. That's the first appearance of Cable when Nathan Summers was born. Here he says, "You're right, Nathan," and this is where we kind of solidify that this is the first part where we're going to say that Nathan is that Cable. His name is Nathan, and he's actually Christopher Summers, right? So and what you just pointed out, there's no real jokey dialogue, right? We don't have what we saw in Hulk 181 where we showed the Canadian intelligence. We have him talking about Mr. Tolliver. And Mr. Oliver hired him to find him and kill Cable, right? And his dialogue is very, he's pretty wordy with not a lot of humor, right? So it's kind of like a really more of a technical kind of guy rather than a jokey type of guy, at least not yet. So let's see how we're going on, right? And yeah, he's pretty much direct, and he just talks about how much the closest to joke is a Arrivederci, right? And I don't know why he didn't know that Cannonball was coming. He's probably silent cannonballing, but we have this, and I think this kind of shot here is kind of the key shot here with him with the gun here, that sort of thing. But it kind of falls apart at this part. But there's a cool shot here in the middle. And he has these weapons that somehow, what's the name, can't get away from, right? He went through his field and it knocks him out. But at the same time, he's concentrating on Cannonball. Cable comes in there, starts putting the beats on him. This is the closest we get to a joke. I think you might have broke my jaw, Nathan. And I hate when that happens. And he tosses a knife. Now we see the arm down, so we gotta figure out that he threw it. And there's the speed lines, but I keep thinking that the knife came from the other hand, but we have to set up that he's doing a very short hand here for the throwing of the knife. So it's not really well established, but we get to set up that he's going to be a killer. And then of course he the rest of the New Mutants show up, and they do little to stop him, just a little bit of earthquake, but then he throws out some other tricks that he has, right? And this is something that he has that saps mutants' powers. So it looks like we're going to have this moment like a Deathstroke scene where, as you already mentioned, Deathstroke, that he's going to be able to handle all the New Mutants. And, and then at the same time, we see these big things behind. We're like, what's going on here? I don't know what's going on here, but we'll establish that he got these blades to the back, and they were confused just as much as I was. And Domino comes here.
I'm still confused.
You called thy king, right? And we see Cable's first smile, right? And he calls him, he's been babysitting, right? We have Cable, we have Deadpool, he's been taken out. For me, a lot of the drama was gone. Having this thing come here, this character come out of nowhere. At least they would set up a page where she was tracking Cable, so when she shows up, it's not just out of it's kind of weird. I don't know how this worked back then in the day, but I don't actually Domino. I don't think ever worked for me. I think Domino was the weirdest thing, and I think the movie played it up to say, what is this character? And I think I don't know if her power was luck, but and you already revealed that this isn't the real one, which Rob said that in the editorial were like, what a surprise, she's not the real Domino. It's like, who cares? This is Vanessa, and the real Domino is in the basement. You have to set some of this stuff up for the payoff to happen. It seems like I just came up. This is the thing that we would complain about with Jack Kirby, that he was just introducing a character on a page type of deal. But he would at least set up the Black Racer. Even if you didn't like the Black Racer, he set up that this guy, he's a paraplegic that comes in and becomes what's the name. There's at least a little bit of setup that he's come. The problem is that Kirby was introducing something new all the time, but he was setting the stuff up. And I think, he's taking a note from Kirby, but at the same time, we had to do some sort of setup. But I really was the Domino thing. That was where I kind of we kind of went too far here, right? This is another stand creation here that didn't really go anywhere, but had Jim Lee doing the design. Oh, so they're so we have it. So we got the school factor. See the setup of the books in the back. And everything else in here is the destruction of the stuff here to say that there was a fight going on. but this is the weirdest background ever to set it that it's still a
Yeah,
school.
just give us a bookcase with some books on it. Nobody's reading those books.
And we see Cable and Domino, joking and laughing. And we say, hey, is it kind of like a Bonnie and Clyde? He's actually smiling, right? So here I was like, okay, we're going to get, just from first glance, we're going to get some people coming back. And then next thing you know, they're not coming back. We find out Magna's not coming back. Karma was another favorite, and Daniel Moose are all three of my favorites not coming back. But we're keeping Skids, and Skids Belvins, which is the same name as the artist who did the book before this. I don't think he was the first to draw her though. But anyway, and then the last bit to get rid of this character, which is okay, Paige. We see Richter running away, and something which I think Neil Adams would do, and Byrne would use that kind of breaking the panel to show the action going on. So this one worked for me, even though I didn't really want Richter to leave, right? And then the big reveal, something that we've been worried about this entire series, that what would happen if I think if issue 50 they played out, in this other future, Bobby DaCosta, Roberto DaCosta becomes his father and is evil and all that. And now his father's dead. So it's playing off of all the X stuff. His father has died. And we know that Gideon's behind it, and to be continued. We made it through. I might have made it longer to explain a lot, but it's like, this is the bit that was the thread that's been going on since, I think, the graphic novel, that what would happen if Bobby became his father, and now he has to take over for his father because his father's dead, right? That's the line. But this is one of the things that they had going for it, which Image didn't, is that this stuff was already set up. So with killing of the father, you get all this sort of thing where, is he going to become the bad, terrible businessman, the evil businessman like his father, or what will he do, type of deal. So there we go. And that's as much I think was done outside. I think Sunspot left, and I didn't really understand why he left, but I wasn't really keen on the cast of X Force either, because it was kind of like taking away all of the other characters. But this is a big issue. What do you say? We got through it somehow.
Well, again, in hindsight, it's all set up for X Force. And to be honest, X Force was a Cable-driven series. So if you enjoyed Cable, and a lot of people did, if you enjoyed Cable, then yeah, X Force was going to be your thing. And the characters surrounding him were people who were going to support Cable more so than anything else. So a lot of the other faves I could not have imagined an X Force series where Sunspot was on the same team with Cable, especially when Sunspot could definitely be a bit of a hothead. And who's supposed to be the hothead on the team? Cable. So, it just doesn't work. We need people who can play off him well. And it was in hindsight, of course, it's a vehicle for Liefeld and the characters that he created who were hot. Hey, I came on to New Mutants. I've got all this buzz going. I saved the book. At least that's what he'll tell us today. Let me spin this off and let's use the characters and the momentum that we have over here. And we could put New Mutants to bed. You can always pick that back up if you want, but we can do X Force. And X Force was supposed to be what? The mutants who were willing to do the dirty job, get their hands dirty, if you will, and not take any shorts and wear a lot of munitions, if you will, if you will. And that's where it was. Again, a lot of the stuff I'm looking back on in hindsight, I've never been very big into the mutants, be it the X-Men. Well, I like the Fab Five. I like the original five, and that's pretty much the end of it. Then I can pick and choose here and there some characters that I like. But as a regular reader, the storylines that I actually got pulled into were the ones that were either really, really good or the ones that somehow encompassed the entire Marvel universe, like Onslaught. Where okay, I have to read some of these over here so I can have a better understanding of what's going on. But it was something where the people who were enjoying it, continued to enjoy it. I was never really on board with the storyline or X-Force for that matter. So, I came into it well after its heyday. But it was something that guys really liked at the time.
Yeah. Well, just to kind of, since we talked about X Force, here is which would be the final issue of the New Mutants, and they would get the what's the name the new Thunderbird, or he renamed Warpath, which he would somehow gain the strength of Colossus. We'd have a long shot type character, and we get Vixen from the DC. Sorry, no, that's Feral, and it's like, so ultimately it was kind of your strong guy, your wolf guy, your Gambit type of character, Gambit slash long shot, and then the two mainstays that he still liked, which was Boom Boom and Cannonball, with Cable being in there. So ultimately, there's big buzz. This this issue had a reprint, like a second printing, so it was a big issue too. This issues also, and usually the 100 issue, I think Rob pointed out that they always they could be like a dip off, like no one, they know it's over, but this thing was still big. And X Force, of course, was big, which was what, I guess it was a 4 point something, 0.5 million type of thing. So, you had this, he had the buzz, had the finger on the pulse, but ultimately, one of the things I wanted to show was that how many comic book shorthands can you use to get through a story without really establishing much? They didn't really establish a relationship between Gideon and Cannonball, but he shows up at the end. He only said his father, but there's nothing saying that they had outside of him, them saying the name Eve and in the panel before. And so there's a lot of comic book shorthands utilized, which, since it's the X book, you can kind of, and that's what Chris Claremont was good for. He and Louise Simonson, they would, if the art wasn't showing the story they wanted to tell, or if it was weak, they would explain away the stuff that would need to be. So that's what Louise was already doing, which I don't think anyone would really give her the credit for doing. But that's one of the things when you have this, and I think Byrne, who else? Fabian Nicieza, when the Fabian Nicieza not on this book, you could see he wasn't going too far. He wasn't going as loose as Jeff Loeb would do, but he was doing a little bit of something. But he was kind of letting the art, you can see in X Force, he was kind of letting the art just be there and give you the most minimal description as possible, not to get in the way of the art, because they realize that the art, you could say it's similar to Paul, was a Galassi on, what's that thing, on Master Kung Fu, not with getting rid of the art, but they were saying this guy looks like Steranko, let's just let him do his thing type of deal. We're not going to kill ourselves on storytelling, where as he was doing stuff, he was being stronger storyteller than Steranko at times, where Steranko's storytelling would kind of be, playing off of cool shots, and Rob also plays off of that, but it's not as strong as a Galassi or anyone who you look at, say, a Marshall Rogers, who kind of throws out storytelling for cool shots. Here's where we're going too far over, but at the same time, it was big for the kids. It's big for the fans, and people still remember it as, oh, the artist before it was terrible. Rob was great. he saved it type of deal. So, yeah, but it's in my mind, it's interesting to see how little you could do to get across your story in a comic book, and it's a real exercise in how much the readers could fill the gaps. And he utilized that when he went to Youngblood, but at the same time, it was, even though it was bought a lot, it was kind of panned, and he's rewritten. Had I think someone re-script Youngblood after that. So, any other thoughts?
Oh man, that Steranko comparison is.
Yeah,
you know how much I love Steranko, and to see him compared with Rob Liefeld is kind of difficult. Even if that might be applicable in the situation, but everything that you said in terms of the story, this is actually what readers would come to accept even more so later on, because you would have stories that were delivered and they were all shorthand, you
Yes.
know, more so than, again, the if you go look at the golden age, silver age stories, which are incredibly compressed stories. There's so much happening in 20, 30 pages, or even 12, like original acting comics. One is like what, 12, maybe 16 pages altogether. I have to
Mhm.
look at it again. And there's so many events and things that happen in that short period of time that, yeah, you would get some shorthand because, the short stories. So there's a lot of the stuff that you would throw out. And then they went from that to even shorter because at the very least here, you were still getting a good amount of panels per page. And then it became like, look, we're going to just do 5 panels per page
Yeah.
and throw in a whole bunch of splash. And, you could get through a comic book in under in under 5 minutes, as opposed to having to sit and read for, 20 minutes on like on a Burn Fantastic Four issue to make certain that you understood everything.
Well,
So,
sorry, keep going.
no, it's just, it's, it's interesting to look at because a lot of the stuff that you will see here continued later, and were people making their own connections, which I don't necessarily think was a great thing because part of the discussion amongst comic readers and actually having a community of comic readers that could connect through it was having some definitive action within the story, some definitive events within the story, as opposed to it being interpretive because this happened off panel, or hey, these guys can put it together. And then we what do we get by 2023? We literally have, like, films like Justice League where it's almost all shorthand and the guys are just filling in the blanks, and the director's like, yeah, that's exactly what I meant. So you look at stuff like this in this particular issue and where it went long term.
Yeah, I'd like to mention what you mentioned, which was like the golden, like the Silver Age Superman, where they would do Superman traveling through space. Or sometimes they would just do cut through one panel here to the other. But the best description is him traveling through time. There would be a panel, and we see all the dates, and him going back in time and just flying through those like that, or pushing the Superboy pushing the time bubble and like going through these time things. Those type of shorthands, which work in comic books, were always kind of fun type of things, and it's kind of, but it would suggest. I think Byrne played it up when he had Superboy appear in his run, where Superboy is traveling through time and Superman catches his foot, and then this suggests how powerful this character is to go through time, which readers would look at that and be like, wow, he's breaking he's going faster than the speed of light. Wow, that means he must be super powerful type of deal, which would suggest so much stuff and would be interesting in some ways. Or for the one panel he's on there on Earth, next panel he's on another planet. It's like, good Lord, he's not losing any time as far as time and space, where you come back and you're younger than your kid now type of deal. He's that he's still the same age. He's going so fast. It would suggest so many cool things, which writers would play up and play up afterwards. So it's interesting how the comic shorthand would be one thing, and this just kind of pushed it to its limits, where just like, how can we just get the cool, and I can't even say it's the coolest action, but it's how can you get some action packed shots in here that the kids are gonna go crazy for, which I think they call what was it? They call anchor shots type of deal, where you have a shot and then you have tiny panels of storytelling around it. So I don't think the tiny panels of storytelling are actually there, because they're always kind of cluttered panels. But it's this one isn't one where you have it's not a book where, like, when Rob looks at these books, he's kind of overly positive, and at the same time, when Byrne looks at his X-Men, he's overly negative. Like, good Lord, they didn't take my crown away from me looking at this stuff. They're still saying this old stuff is better. It's like, I just like, Dave Crockett was so much better than me type of deal. Where I think he said it when they reprinted it. He's like saying, how do you feel they're doing your reprints in the like, showing what made you famous. Is like, well, they might not think I should have been that famous after looking at that stuff, because he could see the weaknesses of it. But the image guys, it's always good to be confident, and they stayed confident in the work they were doing. So that's not a negative, but most of the time artists look at their stuff and they're just like, oh god, I can do so much better now. But these guys are like, hey, this is, I'm giving the kids what they want, and they loved it, and they still hold this stuff up. To detriment to the entire New Mutants run, where they're like, there was nothing good in here. Where it's like, all right, I've done it. I've gone too far. It's
Not far enough.
it's seeping in, which is ultimately to say it was tough as buying the book, wanting seeing Rob's stuff, saying, hey, this could be like this next stage for the New Mutants, and then see all of the characters be almost most of them removed. The only one that was from the original book is Cannonball, who wasn't actually my favorite in the book. He would kind of be the leader with Danny, but Danny was always kind of the leader. And, the first New Mutant was always Karma, because she was in the Marvel Team Up 100, which is a fun book. So she was kind of always, to me, the first New Mutant. So it was kind of sad that she never stayed with the book, but she shows up in Wolverine, which I don't think was a good showcase for her. But, not like they kind of gutted the book. That's the thing, where it's like, yes, for the new fans coming in, it was like, wow, this book took off. And for me, it's like, they already had cool characters. It's just have fun with those guys. We get your,
Yeah, the new guys coming in didn't know that. They didn't care.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the stuff that they were doing, where you had new people coming in and they were like, okay, this is cool. We like this. This is great. Nobody could have predicted that the guys reading in, 91, 90, 92 were still going to be around 20 years later.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the stuff that you did becomes, oh, well, we've seen this already. We want something else. We want this type of, because comic used to have guys who would cycle in and then cycle out. It would be like on average, maybe a 4 or 5 year period, and you pick up new readers, and you could, some of the stuff that you did 5 years ago, you might revisit again, because these guys were new. And you're like, all right, you came in here and you did all of this stuff, and a lot of the shortcuts, you did that, shorthand, shortcut, whichever one works better for you. And you have a readership that said, okay, this was their introduction. This is where they came in. So they're like, oh, this is cool. You have, the visuals and the action, and a lot of the story stuff wasn't necessarily there. And then long term, you see how it affects not just like the New Mutants, but comics overall. When it's time to, okay, let's see if we can get a story together, and you can count on one hand over the course of a decade how many stories are like really, just really, pulse pounding things, because of the characters and the knowledge of the overall universe, as opposed to just run of the mill. So it's there's a lot of stuff that goes on, and it starts here.
Yeah, it's that's, and my last thing would be, you pointed it out, which I never really, because I kept with this book after Rob was gone, and what's the name, Fabian Nicieza takes Cable out. He removes him from the book after, I think, Executioner's Song, and it's just this X-Force kind of figuring things out on their own type of deal. So it's interesting that you mentioned that it was a Cable show, because I remember what happened afterwards, that he kind of would show up again, because they were thinking about giving him his own comic book. But you're totally right. It definitely became the Cable show, where even what was the issue that Mike Mignola did? It was a Cable looking at some stuff, and we find out that he can levitate things, which would be telekinesis, like some Cyclops' sons. But it was like, even that issue was a Cable issue. So he'd become the most popular thing. He shows up in the Spider-Man crossover, where he's got his armor on, where people actually complain that, oh, Todd McFarlane isn't doing a great Cable. It's like, no, he's doing the Todd Cable. But yeah, it's it definitely, to showcase his cool new characters. But I always thought the New Mutants had decent characters. They just needed to stop worrying about them becoming their own type of phoenixes. If I do this, I might utilize, I might lose total control type of thing. So that was the only issue I had with the book early on. But they always had fun, cool characters. But we had 98. It was, I know it's the biggest thing for a lot of people. For me, as a late teen or tween, it was a kind of a letdown, sorry to say, to be honest. But you can see the energy and the success of the book is still one of those things which led to Fabian Nicieza doing all the stuff he did, making him even more of a joke. No, I think in issue 2 of X-Force, he might have a little more jokiness to him, but he doesn't really get that really humorous thing till you get to the later X-Force issues, and then the circle chase, and then when Joe Kelly breaks the fourth wall, it completely goes overboard, leading him. But that shows the success of a character. Same like Wolverine, everyone sort of puts into the pot, and he becomes this big thing. But Rob says, "I'm the creator." Fabian's still getting co-creator. I did it. I could put a janitor on that book, and it would have sold. It's like, well, I would have rather, I'd rather Louise Simonson on the book, where she would have kind of put some a little more background to it, but at the same time, Fabian was like riding the wave, and he was keeping the dialogue very sparse, as much doing as little as possible to keep the energy going. So I got to give him credit for doing that, because people loved it.
I wish they had put a janitor on the book so you could see Rob rail against that. How dare a janitor get co-credit?
Oh my God, yeah. All right, so we done did it. We gave you Hulk 181 and New Mutants 98 for Marvel, one of the hottest books to have in hand that you could possibly have had in your hand in the time when you were collecting books, because I think 181 at some points when I was a kid it was under 100 when I was a kid, and then 98 you could bought us the stands. There were tons of those issues, and I had one of them which I sold well before it became the multi-million-dollar thing it is now. But not multi-million, but a good, was it tens of thousands maybe? What is it?
Hulk 81?
Oh, 98. I know the Hulk 181 is out of the stratosphere, but what's 98?
Yeah, I don't even remember. The last time I got offered a raw copy of that book was, it might have been $3 or $4 grand. Mm-hmm. And that was like a low grade, maybe between a 4 and a 6, something of that nature.
But white one, man.
And then the 98, I've sold that a few times. I actually have a copy of a 98. I think it's graded maybe like a 9.2 or a 9.4. And that's, at the very, man, it's hard to tell, because I remember at one point a graded copy, like a 9.8, might have been at a high of maybe like $800, mm-hmm. that type of stuff, $880 for, guys who wanted to price it that way. And it's definitely not there now. It's definitely not there now. I don't want to say any numbers and be wrong, but it's definitely not an $800 book any longer.
Oh, okay. Well, once we have the battle between Deadpool and Wolverine, those books will be basically you hand over your house for that month-long period to buy and sell it, and then it'll go back to whatever it is, or maybe it won't.
Now is a great time if guys are really interested in buying that book. There was the initial rush, mm-hmm. and I remember I sold some copies, and then of course the lull goes down, and everybody waits for the price to go down, blah blah blah. But since it's going to happen, that this is going to happen, that Wolverine and Deadpool will be, appearing together in the movie. Everybody likes these characters and they can't wait for it. Now's a good time to get it. I've got if you're looking to buy the rarest copy, there's a newsstand edition. There's a newsstand edition of that first fight between Wolverine and Deadpool. And, if you scoop it up now, because the film's still on the horizon, but, definitely not the end of the tunnel, if you will. You want to mix metaphors that way. But, I find the guys always wait too late. I want the book, but I'm gonna wait for the price to go down. What are you waiting for the price to go down to? Zero? It's either if you want it, you're still gonna have to pay some money for it at the end of the day. But now's a good time to go pick it up if that's something you genuinely want. I always recommend getting ungraded copies, in person if you can. Look it over, find something nice, pack it away. But of course, the graded stuff, that's always the bigger fish, but you're gonna pay more money, just so that you know.
Well, if you want your money's worth, I would go out and buy the Wolverine issue where he fights Deadpool, drawn by Adam Kubert. That is a gorgeous issue. I can't co-sign the first the Liefeld one that he did because it's kind of it's too far gone at that period. But we had a great artist doing those two characters. So if
Oh
you
no,
out
it's the Kubert one. That's
that
the one
one,
that's the one. It's the
that's
Kubert
the
one.
one. Okay, cool. I'm glad
Yeah, I don't
that
know
one
anything
I was
about I don't
worried.
know anything about Liefeld doing anything. The Kubert one, that's the one everybody wants.
Wow. Okay. Cool. I was trying to get that one signed. I was like, maybe this thing will cost some money, but I don't think Adam Cooper was there at that time. But it's good. It's good to know that one is the one as far as I think you get your money's worth with that art in Larry Hama's story, and Hubert was spotty as far as keeping up doing a monthly type of thing, but he was the regular artist and all the cool him versus Cyber, him versus Sabretooth. There's a bunch of really cool issues in there to catch out. But yeah, I'm glad to hear that one. This is a great cover too. It's like, oh man, Wolverine is behind kick. You got Deadpool holding him up in the air. But yeah, all right, cool. All right, then we're gonna close this one out. Nice long one for you guys, and we weren't too harsh on the Liefeld thing, or too harsh on which people would say. People complain about Hulk 181 is like, why is Wolverine's first appearance in the Hulk? Like in the Hulk, the Hulk smash Hulk. He's an important character. He should be. It's like, shut up. The Hulk was a big. Actually, at the same time, this was more about the story back in the day than it was.
They really say nonsense like that?
There was a period where people kind of like. I think if you read what's those things, Wizard, they would have some comments like that where they would be like, it was kind of like they would go into the Hulk smash because it was Peter David. So basically saying you're buying a period when it was like not the Peter David period. It's what they would call the generic Hulk, where he was just Hulk smash. Where you can't say that these writers like Stan, Roy Thomas, Steve Englehart, Jerry Conway, Lean Wen were doing a generic Hulk, and even later on Stern, and Bill Mantlo. Like these guys were giving us some of the funnest Hulk smash dialogue as you can. Like the Hulk says to Submariner, "What is your might compared to mine?" Like Hulk that wasn't just didn't have to. Even if he would lose, it didn't matter. He would be like, "I'm still the strongest one there is." So it was just a fun period. But people had a hard time understanding when the Peter David thing came. And they were just like, well, he just kind of says Hulk smash. It's like, I think Hulk 182 always bring it up that where Wolverine is taken away and Hulk meets Crackerjack Jackson, who's like this bum who wants to help his son who's in prison, who actually is the son is a criminal. But Crackerjack says, hey, you need to know how to sign your own name. And then the Hulk writes his own name in the sand, and he's really proud of it. And then, of course, it's a story where, there's the Lean Wen story is always a sort of like a tragic end where Crackerjack gets killed. And the Hulk is at a period where he's like, he gets to go through his memory to know what he's supposed to do. And he goes and he figures it's all done with description, but the Hulk has to make he's going to bury him. So he buries Crackerjack and he's trying to write with his finger and puts a tombstone there, and you see that where he learned how to write from Crackerjack Jackson. So that was like at one point the most important Hulk issue ever. Like the issue after Wolverine was because Hulk learned how to write his name. It was a very powerful issue, and that went away for what are the cool issues? Him fighting these characters and Peter David. The Peter Davids are the good ones. That sort of thing we had. So we went into it again, but that was the sentiment because Peter David was so successful with the Hulk.
that whole 70s run with the I mean, if the formula was anything, the Hulk is this misunderstood monster. He wants to be left alone, or at the very least, he just wants to go his own way without being bothered. And yet, every issue, either somebody was dragging him into something, or something would happen inadvertently. And Bruce Banner's a tragic character, so they played on that, but they did a really good job. They did a really good job going through the 70s up into the early 80s of giving you one shot adventures in the serial and still making them compelling. Rick Jones might be around, or Jim Wilson, might be around. So, we have somebody to connect to, but they were really good at crafting these stories of, the Hulk, who's a monster to everybody else, but the readers, we know, look, this guy's just getting bothered. And if you just left them alone, probably none of this would happen, like, childlike and demeanor until you get him angry.
Mhm.
And, the anger is always, it's always indignant or righteous anger because he's not bothering anyone. You're always messing with him. And then, of course, the feats of strength that would come from his anger, it was put together pretty well at
Mhm.
the end of the day. And it was successful to the point that that's what guys wanted to return to after David's run. And yet, after it ran its course, oh, we want to get back to Hulk Smash. We want to get back to. I remember Liefeld saying the same thing. He wanted to get back to Hulk Smash, and I was like, good grief, this guy doesn't know how to write. That's probably the best he could do with the Hulk is, the Hulk Smash.
Yeah, no, it's well, that's the other thing. Whereas we didn't mention that, obviously, well, who's it? I think it was who's that guy? I think Todd Rob was saying that Todd was turning to, these guys when they're just peers and saying, like, why are we're putting so much effort into this stuff? And I'm paraphrasing, of course. It's not his voice, but he's like, we should be getting the writing credit too. Like, we're putting a lot of stuff in here. We're adding stuff, and these guys are just putting dialogue to the stuff we do. And a lot of stuff we throw in there, they keep. They don't ask us to redo the page. They just keep the page type of thing. And it's like, oh yeah, I'm adding stuff. I'm adding stuff. And you see Eric Larson get the chance to write Spider-Man afterwards, and he does like a Marvel team up thing, the way we see the Marvel universe of Spider-Man fighting the Sinister Six. The entire Marvel universe fights the Sinister Six, or Rob doing Deadpool and Todd doing his Spider-Man run. But I think they kind of missed what these writers and or scripters were bringing to the book, because these guys, for the people who were even the artist writers of before then that they were emulating, these guys read a lot. They read a lot of stuff, and that translates into being able to write. Like, that's I think it's Stephen Barnes was saying, if you want to, if you want to write comics, kind of read the pulps. You always kind of try to do something above the ground that you're trying to do. But if you're reading novels and you've been reading novels since a kid, that's going to help your ability to read and to write, and especially write comic books. You might not be able to get to the novel stage, even though some of the obvious comic pros have done novels. If you can do a solid comic book drawing from this, bringing a lot of these artists or writers, even like Roy Thomas, bringing stories that they'd read into comic books. So, but that allows you to have a lot of storytelling at your feet as far as the writing aspect, and then you're able to translate it. And even if you look at Neil Gaiman and say, wow, how does he do this? And at the same time, he has a lot of books and a lot of subject matter that he draws from and puts into his stories. Or he's taking the idea of gods or existing gods and reformulating it to his American gods. So it's like it's seemingly basic, but it's harder to do if you haven't done that sort of legwork. So it's not that easy just to pick up a pencil and say, hey, these guys are just writing all this other stuff, these big monologues and these descriptions and all this stuff. But there's a little something more to it. And sometimes it could be a little bit of nothing. It could be like a weekend writing the dialogue, but at the same time, it's something that you can slowly start to build on. And that, you can see that with the Chris Claremont and Burns X-Men, where there's a bit where they just need to show what was it? Show that Phoenix is bad, and she takes the sun out, and she takes out the Shire, the ship, and Byrne adds in the killing of this planet to make it even more bigger. But at the same time, Chris Claremont adds in Lilandra seeing the ship being destroyed and saying, this is what we worried about from the beginning. And that little bit suggested that Phoenix was this age-old entity that they even using to this day. So it could seem to be like this guy's just BSing, which they are, but at the same time, it suggests so much more to it. So I think they did themselves a disservice, even if maybe they wanted a hotter writer to do it. But obviously, that's the problem with Nicieza, because Nicieza, even though he became the guy who was doing X-Men, New Warriors, X-Force, had all these titles he was doing, and at the same time, when they could find a hotter writer like Mark Waid, they pushed him aside, even though he'd done all the legwork on Deadpool for him to come in. Or same with Scott Lobdell, they got in Steve Siegel, they got the Vertigo guys to write the X-Men. It was just like, and Joe Kelly, who was hot at the time. So it's just, you could just push these guys out. Whereas Chris Claremont, if he wasn't hot or not, the book was selling and he stayed on it for 17 years. They respected that. So, yeah. So, but ultimately, the writers, the scripters, however little they did, they brought a lot to it. And I think Rob needs to kind of look at saying, what was the difference between that and this? And I would think there's a drop in comparison to what happened, what Louise was doing. And no slight to Fabian Nicieza, because you can see it get better when he was writing it himself. But he was just like saying, this is a roller coaster. We're going to let this roller coaster roll. And I think where you see when Chris Claremont leads the X-Men, you can see the scripters are kind of putting a lot of stuff into Jim Lee's stuff and then making the product a little more feel like the X-Men type of deal. But anyway, that's it. We've been trying to close this one out for a while, but there's so much story, so much stuff it leads into, and so much stuff we can add to it. But the comparison of two characters that were introduced with a little bit of their background there, and they became very popular. One instantly popular, Wolverine, it took at least I guess it'd be 3 or 4 years before he became really popular. But they were sitting there, the most popular characters out at Marvel now. Spinner Rack.
Out.
Out.